speaker today, his two talks on his new book are on YouTube, and I would recommend you listen. And I'm intrigued to learn more about Cody, so I asked him to come along and just tell us about his own journey in recovery. So that's what he's here to do tonight. So it's my great pleasure to turn it over to you, Cody. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Patrick, and for the wonderful introduction. I do want to just really offer my gratitude to this group. It's such an amazing honor to just to be recognized, and just to the sense of like excitement that I get from you guys has been truly incredible. I'm very, very grateful. It's almost been I've actually spent the last 4 or 5 days sort of I guess coming down from the sort of dopamine rush that I was on, just sharing with you guys. So it's been a nice break, and thank you very much. So so as far as my story goes, so I'm an alcoholic and I'm a drug addict. So I grew up in southern Utah in the United States, a little town called St. George. When I was, coming up, there was 20 or 30,000 people in the area. It's now bloomed to like over 300,000 or something. So been a fast growing little town, but it's a kind of a desert landscape. And it's a Mormon community, but my family was not Mormon. So my dad wasn't a member of the LDS church. My mom was, but she was I guess what you'd call a Jack Mormon. And coming up, alcoholism and addiction were certainly part of our family dynamic, stemming from both of my parents, and a lot of their sort of extended family, my aunts and uncles. And I was always really enamored. So the narcotics remained sort of underground, right? There was a lot of pharmaceuticals being used, but the alcohol was more sort of present. It was we could see the drinking, and so I was always enamored with alcohol. I always felt that alcohol seemed to have a certain kind of power, because my mom, when she would start to drink it, it seemed like everybody in the house could breathe a little better, and so I always appreciated the power of alcohol. And sadly, when I started drinking around the age of 14 or 15, and drinking and using, I quickly became the scapegoat of the family. So a lot of the sort of underlying sort of delusion and disease of alcoholism and drug addiction was sort of heaped onto me as a youngster. So and it's not to cast any blame or anything on anyone, but that was a heavy weight to bear, and it's something that I'm still sort of working through in the work that I'm doing today. So when I was about 17 years old, my best friend had decided to go on on a mission, in a Mormon mission. So we were running buddies and we would party all the time. And then one day he just kind of up and quit and was preparing to go on a mission. And my life kind of got, complicated at that time as a teenager. I was sort of like the teenage town drunk, I guess. And I saw, and it just, there was enough pressure on me that I decided to go on a mission too. And so I started to sort of prepare, and started attending church. And I was really intrigued by what I was discovering, because in my family we didn't talk much about God and stuff like that. So I came into this sort of Christian organization, and I started to learn about Christian dogma, and I really got it involved. Like I started looking at that sort of religious experience from a quite an academic perspective. But something had happened to me also right around that time, which becomes extremely significant in my life. Is I don't know, probably 2 or 3 months after I had quit drinking and quit using drugs, and I was getting ready for a mission. This older couple was kind of teaching us, and like we would hang out with them and have dinner, and we would kind of like read the Bible and other stuff. And the older woman, one day she said, "Cody, I think you should go home and pray really kind of ask God for a confirmation, or like ask God if he's there or whatever, and so I did. I went home and I kneeled down, and I basically just said the prayer, I guess almost like what Bill Wilson said, if there's a God, let him show himself to me. But it was more, just was like, God, if you're there, like, I would like to know. And she, the woman told me to look inside after I asked, right? And so when I kneeled down and I said the prayer and I started to pay attention to sort of my bosom, I guess, what happened was there was sort of this little kernel of peace that kind of erupted, and it just started to grow. And eventually it filled my body, and then it just filled the room. And I just sort of sat there and like basked in this feeling of joy and light. And I don't know, maybe it lasted for 5 or 10 minutes. But it was like a real presence. I really felt something. And to the point where I was even like, is this real? Like I was talking to myself about it as it was happening, and it just sort of it persisted. And like what Wilson says, God comes to most people gradually, but his impact upon me was sudden and profound. And like I said, I started diving into the scriptures really deeply. Like I really started, parsing out the Old Testament and the New Testament. I read some of Josephus, for example. I have like a Strong's dictionary concordance. I used to look up like the Hebrew and the Greek words in the Bible, and just really try to like figure all this stuff out. And I ended up going on a mission to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I was there for 2 years. And I came home and quickly got married, and we had 2 kids right away. And so, and by this point, I'm away from drugs and alcohol now for 4 or 5 years, and I'm married, and I've got these 2 kids, and I'm going to school full time. I'm doing pretty good in school, but like everything else in my life feels very sort of um, you know, kind of on the edge, like I feel like I'm about to be split apart by the paradoxical knife edge. I mean, and I'm wondering why do I feel this way? Like I was just miserable. I was depressed. I couldn't hold a job. I was having a hard time paying my bills. Page 52 of the big book. It was just that was me. And and I mean, in particular, like I would get in fights with my ex-wife at the time, and I was married to her then, and we would, and I wouldn't be able to bring myself to talk to her, to apologize, to ask her if there was any way we could work it out. And so we would just go like 2 or 3 days without talking. So there's just a lot of like emotional pressure and emotional buildup. Like Clancy says, it's like as if someone had snuck into my gut and tightened down a spring, right? And eventually the spring popped. And what happened was, the thought occurred to me that I should have a couple beers, and it came sort of like a flash of inspiration, and without a set, I mean, I was like, that is a great idea. And I literally like walked outside, hopped in my truck, drove across the street, and parked in the car wash, and went in and bought 2 32-ounce Miller High Lifes. And I guess what happened next might be considered like another spiritual experience, because as I started to drink the alcohol, the first thing that occurs, like as it hits my bloodstream and sort of courses through my body, is I just kind of can relax. I let my shoulders down and I can breathe. And there's finally like some space between me and all of my problems. And I drink a little bit more, and then an even bigger miracle happens, is that all of the things that are plaguing me, that my depression, I'm suicidal, I can't get along with my wife, etc., all of those things kind of start to change, and I begin to see the world differently. And I start to get hope. And so alcohol sort of has this really profound effect upon me. And before I know it, though, like within 2 or 3 weeks, I'm drinking every day, I'm smoking pot, I'm smoking cigarettes, and I'm married to this Mormon girl, and we've got 2 kids, and she just doesn't even know what's going on. And I'm back to the races, and I don't even know it. And I'm having conversations with myself saying, why is this happening? This is weird. Like I quit, when I was 17, I was able to just kind of stop, and now I just can't stop. And I just, and quickly things started to sort of unravel. Um, Basically, in 2005, I came in to the rooms on 2 second-degree felonies. I got pled into drug court, possession of meth, possession of heroin. I had empty baggies. and a couple of broken pipes and broken needles. And that, that's just my story. And while I was in rehab, we started attending AA meetings, and I could see the signs on the wall that's, is like, I'm smart enough to figure out, hey, you guys want me to try to work on this relationship with God. And one day I told my counselor, um, you know, and I just said, Camille, I'm not going to be able to do this God thing. I mean, I'm like I had this major experience, and now I've just been sinning basically the last 5 years. Like, there's no way I can access this power. God is mad at me, was really exactly what I said. And she said something to me that at the time sounded so profound and so life-changing and so sort of unique and novel. She said, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" And I didn't know she had stolen that right out of the big book. But my response to her was, "We can do that." And she said, "Absolutely, you can do that, Cody. Why don't you start kind of trying to work out and figure out what your conception of God is?" And that was really a relieving experience, because it kind of freed me up. And what I started to sort of comprehend, I guess, or sort of create in my own mind as my conception, was the spirit of nature, right? The way Wilson talks about it. And but the thing about that is that initial spiritual experience that I had maybe 5 or 8 years previously, that experience would actually, it's very interesting, because it would end up being a great hindrance to my ability to stay sober. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. um you know Edinger and Hollis and these other individuals who are Jungian psychologists, they talk about the ego suffering from an assumption of omniscience, right, or a delusion of sovereignty. And what would happen to me is I would come into the rooms, into all different 12-step fellowships, and I would get a sponsor, and I would have the sponsor take me through the steps, but I never really bought in with everything, because there was always this sort of thing in the back of my mind that told me that I know what spirituality looks like. I've had a white light experience. I understand this stuff. So I'm just sort of doing the steps as this sort of routine, almost like a recipe that I could use to keep me clean and sober. And I kept relapsing over and over. And finally, in 2013, I relapsed one more time. I was doing a 4-step with a sponsor. I was going to meetings. I was so tired of relapsing. I was really hanging on for dear life. And I got in a fight with my girlfriend. And one more time, I'm relapsing. I'm on my way to the wrong side of town one more time. And I'm asking myself, how is this happening again? This is impossible. And a couple weeks later, I find myself homeless, carless. I've got a backpack with a couple of like dirty clothes in it, and a stolen heater that I was going to try to trade for some drugs. And basically I'm sitting on the curb out front of the Hard Rock Casino in Las Vegas, and it's dark, and it's busy. There's people coming in and going out. Maybe it was a Friday night, I don't remember. And something occurred to me at that moment, and it's probably a third major spiritual experience, is that I noticed that nobody was looking at me. And for whatever reason, that struck me, that particular moment, because I realized that there's a group of, like, a class of people that I don't look at either. And it's the homeless people, right? And I don't look at them because I know that they might ask me for something if I do. And I like to give homeless people things, but I don't always like to make eye contact, and whatever. And I realized that the world in general had now been kind of seeing me that way. And I guess what happened was, the cosmos sort of held up a mirror, and I was able to see. I looked into the mirror, and I was able to see clearly what I had become and who I had become after all these years of relapsing, all of these years going in and out of 12-step programs. And I was a deadbeat dad. I was unemployed. I wasn't seeing my kids. My family didn't know where I was. That nobody wanted to talk to me except the people in the program. And something changed in me right then. And I realized that I really do need help, that I really don't know how this is supposed to work. And the and what I did is I turned myself over unreservedly to the care of God group of drunks. And I had this sense of sort of, looking back, I believe it was intuition that for me, but at that point in my life, I had to just count God or the higher power as almost something as an outside issue, that I didn't have an opinion on that, and I was just going to set that aside. I don't know how this is supposed to work. I don't know what God is. I have no idea about any of it. And I really just became sort of the subject of my sponsor, if you will, and just and really asked him, like, how should I behave? What should I do? What can I do? And slowly my life started to get better, right? And I remember one year, I was about 5 years in, and I was sitting in a meeting, and the speaker was talking about step two. And the thought occurred to me sort of out of nowhere that there's been a miracle. I have done step two. And it really struck me that had just happened to me, that I didn't really do it. It just did it to me. And I'm reminded of this quote from Jung. He says, man cannot conquer the tremendous polarity of his nature on his own resources. He can only do so through the terrifying experience of a psychic process that is independent of himself, that works him rather than he it. And that's certainly been my experience in regards to many of the steps, especially step two. And like I said, that was around 5 years. And as powerful as the steps were for me, and I love this sort of topic and this sort of underlying thesis of emotional sobriety, because what happened is and again, this is all sort of with the wisdom of looking back, but I found myself on a spiritual plateau, and the I guess the evidence I have of that is that in my personal life, things were pretty good at home, but my wife and I would get sort of in these fights, right? And they would happen maybe like once or twice a month, and they would just really spiral out of control to where, like, it's like they became these sort of globalized arguments, and there was just no getting anywhere on either side. And then I would call my sponsor, right? And my sponsor and I are sort of having the same conversation like once or twice a month. And eventually he kind of runs out of good things, I can only say I'm sorry so many times, right? There was something was just missing there. And on the other side of that, my wife, who, was also in the program and doing her part, with the sponsor and everything else, she kept, she just really wanted to get into therapy. She wanted to do couples therapy. And I was pretty reluctant for that, to do that. My conception was that if I'm doing these beautiful, wonderful 12 steps, I shouldn't need any outside help. Like if I need outside help, then something's wrong with my program. And whether that's true or not, I find it to be a pretty common sort of attitude, I think, in the 12-step fellowships. And I have, and actually I was thinking about what I might talk about here in this talk, and really what kind of came to me was that I think it's actually the opposite. Like, if I actually gain enough insight into my own life to recognize that I need outside help, whether that be in the form of another 12-step fellowship or professional help with a therapist or whatever it is, then that actually means that my 12-step program is working, right? Because I'm aware of the limitations that I'm encountering in my own program. And eventually that's what happened. We ended up finding a great therapist, who she's a sex counselor, a sex therapist, and she's, extremely open-minded, and she just was such a great listener. The minute we found her, I was like, I kind of bought in. I was like, oh, this could actually work. I like this woman. And she recommended that we get individual therapists as well, like on top of that. So, and so we did. So we had our couples therapist, my wife had a therapist, and then I had an individual therapist. And my individual therapist she was young. She had just graduated with her master's. She was like 27 or 28 years old. And I had some hesitations about that. And I was yet to buy in. And then the funniest thing happened, and I guess it's another spiritual experience. is the night before my third or fourth session with that woman, I was having a conversation with my sponsor, and he was telling me, like, and bless his heart, he's always been very open and very honest about everything that's going on. And he was telling me one more of these kind of experiences he was having in the realm of dating, right? And like, we all know that it was going to be a bad thing, but he was going to do it anyways. And it was just like this, just a lot of craziness and excitement for him. And then he said something that struck me. He said, and I wrote this down so I could remember. He said, "I know I'm crazy, but at least I'm fully conscious of it." And as he said that, I I for whatever reason at that moment, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because that's essentially, that describes the attitude that I had had in my program and in my life for the previous 7 or whatever years that I was working these steps. And it reminded me of an Ettinger quote that I stumbled upon. I was reminded of this last night. St. Augustine said, "Love God and do whatever you want." And Edward Ettinger adds, he says, do whatever you want, but just do it consciously, right? Uh, and and that makes a lot of sense to a person like me. However, the question really is for me today, just like it was then, just like it was in all those years that I was relapsing, how do I know if I'm fully conscious, right? Like, how do I know, even sitting here today, how do I know that I'm not fooling myself in some major way, right? And because I've found myself to be quite tricky when it comes to, dealing with the shadow and just seeing things as they really are, rather than the way I want to see them. So anyways, that all said, what happened was, the next day I went into my therapist, and I basically said, "Hey, look, I have had sort of some misgivings about this, but this is what happened to me yesterday, and I recognize that I say the exact same thing, and I just don't want to do that, and I'm going to stop pretending that I know what this is supposed to look like." And I pretty much turned my life over to her, unreservedly, right? Not like she's offering me advice or anything like that, but I stopped pretending to have all the answers. And what is really developed out of that has been an amazing experience. Kind of, really, if I'm being honest, it's been as impactful as the 12 steps. And it goes along with the 12 steps so well. And I'm really excited about it. I just want to look at the time. Um, where I'm at today. So I'm still doing therapy. I have a home group. Um, Recently, I actually ended the relationship with my sponsor. That same person, we'd stayed together for quite a few years, kind of through thick and thin. Um, but but it seemed that I've been sort of growing apart from him, and it seems that as I look at it, the relationship kind of initially started with a power dynamic kind of as the basis, right? And I really needed that when I came in. I needed somebody to help me. I had warrants in 4 states. I hadn't paid child support. Like, I didn't know how to keep a job. I mean, there was so many problems. So it was useful to have somebody that had a really strong opinion about how I should live my life and what I should do. But I think the more I sort of individuate and kind of walk this path of self-discovery, then I find myself sort of not needing advice, right? And I recently got a new therapist too, and he said something to me that was really profound and that has really stuck with me. He said that the purpose of these meetings that we do together is not that I, as your therapist, say something so profound that you go out and then change your life, right? That's not what changes us. What changes us is our relationship that we build. This relationship, the back and forth, right? And how true is that? As I look over my experience in the 12-step fellowships, my experience with my sponsors, my experience with my therapist, and with my wife, truly the thing that changes us is those interactions, right? And those kind of back and forths, right? And and I guess if I was to define emotional sobriety at this point, it would really be that that it requires a level of risk taking. with another human, right? On that sort of deep, sort of intimate level, which I'm still trying to figure out what that even means. You know, so, and where I'm at today is this. My wife reminded me of something Mildred says often when she shares that many years ago she was giving a workshop, and at the end of the workshop, um, it was the last session, and she got up to speak, and she just broke down, and she didn't know what to say, and she started crying, and the words that came out were, "I don't have a friend in the world." And that when she was able to make that connection, like obviously the women, you know, swarmed her, and she began to build relationships. And if I was to sort of compare my life in the 12 steps and just in general, that feels like about where I'm at right now. So because there's this lurking notion of like a real big sort of gap between me and the men in my life, whether those men are the people in the 12 steps, or whether even like with the men in my family, like my dad and my son. And that sort of separation and that inability to connect with men, it really bothers me at this point in my life. And so that's what I'm kind of working on, right? So luckily I have this great therapist now who's a man. The first therapist I said was a woman. Um, the one I have now is a man, and that's been good. You know, my previous therapist and I talked about it, and she said it's probably a good idea for you to find a man, just because I have this inability to connect with men. And but I have to be honest about this too. I don't think the problem is all on me, right? For not being able to connect. I think men in general experience this. And so, you know, and it's good that, I mean, I'm glad that I'm able to just get it out there. And I try to have these conversations with as many men as I can, but you know, it is difficult. It is difficult. So yeah. Um, let's see. I think that's about all I have to share. I mean, I guess I can touch quickly on sort of just the history of writing the book. Um, I started writing about it was about 4.5 years ago, and I think about 3 years ago is when it had actually sort of coalesced into a book. And you know, I talked to my therapist a lot while I was writing it, and my sponsor. You know, I had a lot of questions about anonymity as I was writing. You know, how to maintain my anonymity and respect the programs, all of the 12-step programs. You know, and it's funny, the book actually grew out of the notes that I had taken in the margins of my book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was something that I learned um, many years ago from my old friend Jack Greaves, he was a Mormon guy who was from Leeds, England, and he had moved to the States, and he loved to study the scriptures. He had so much knowledge. And we used to sit down with him, and we'd sit down in front of a whiteboard, and he would give us little lessons and stuff, and I would just absorb everything he said. I couldn't get enough of it. And you know, I guess this book is in a large part kind of a remembrance of Jack, because I think he would have dug the book. He might have been concerned about my state in the afterlife, um since I'm not Christian anymore, but you know, whatever. Yeah, so anyways, you know, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I love the program. You know, I'm really excited to participate in the program and to contribute to the program. And I love yeah, I'm very happy. So thank you so much.